Welcome to Roots of Faith Ancestry. I'm Renee Richard, and I'm here with Judy Riffle and Leonard Smith III, and today we're going to be talking about courthouse research. Courthouses house public records of all sorts. They're a wealth of information for the genealogist to delve in, but they can be very intimidating because there's a lot of material that can be found there. A lot of it is beyond the scope of a basic genealogy, but we're going to be giving you the basics of some of the things to look for to fill in that family tree and to fill in that family group sheet that can pretty much consistently be found in a courthouse at a beginner level. So again, like I said, it's kind of overwhelming, kind of intimidating. So the best thing to do is to have a plan, and Leonard goes to a lot of courthouses and he's got a great plan. So we're going to let Leonard fill you in on that.
Well, actually, I want to say that the courthouse is my favorite repository, and that's where I actually have found all the gold for my family research. But let's kind of recap what we've done before. In the earlier show, we actually did a three-step process, very basic, but we want to make sure that you are at this level now that you can actually make it to the courthouse. And for the most part, all of your research has been done online in the comfort of your home. Now, that's going to change now. You're going to the courthouse. So we'll talk about how you want to dress for it and all that other good stuff. But let's start with step one, when we did the who, what, when, and where. You've actually did that for yourself as well as your parents and grandparents or all the ancestors that you had information on. And then at step two, you actually gathered all of this information and you kind of scrutinize and say, okay, let me put this on this chart and this on that chart. But you want to make sure that you've actually cataloged and logged this stuff. And hopefully, step three, you've actually done your interview. You got a chance to interview your oldest living relative, and you've actually taken that to the next level and actually did a little more research online before you're ready to go to the courthouse. So now that you've done all that, now what? Well, you kind of sort through everything you got, put it out on a big table. You start filling in the charts that we talked about earlier, the family tree chart and also the family group sheets that Judy mentioned earlier. And what I like to do is actually make what I call a travel folder. And within this travel folder, this is Andrew Brown, who we've talked about before, my great-grandfather. Because of the fact that a lot of courthouses does not require or don't let you actually use electronic devices in some cases, you want a paper copy of something you can write on, and I actually always bring a couple of lead pencils with me as well. But in this folder, I actually have all of the census information that I've actually found on Andrew Brown online. I actually have some of the information about the land that he owned, just in case I get a chance to go into the land records. But my goal in the courthouse, because remember on his death certificate, I found that his parents were Charles Brown and Mary Brown. So I want to actually go and find Andrew Brown. I knew he was married at one time. I want to get his marriage records, and I also want to get his parents' marriage records if I can find them, since I do have their names. Okay. So what I always do from there is to decide. In this case, I'm going on my paternal side, but this is the step where you have to decide whether you're going to do your maternal or your paternal side, because it can be overwhelming when you're actually trying to do everybody in your family tree, both sides. It's not an easy task as it is, so you want to make sure that you actually kind of pinpoint on the one that you want to work with, and that way it helps when you've accomplished something once you finish your day's research. So how I prepare the day before, a couple of days before. I actually export, and of course, I'm in the technology, so I'm actually using a computer program. I use Rouge on my Mac, and that's another story we'll talk about another time. But I also use Ancestry. And most of the major, if not all, let you generate a GEDCOM file. And that's the file that you can actually import, export to other softwares as well. Some softwares have better reporting capabilities, so you may want to move your files from time to time. So what I use is a program called GenSmart. So it's not expensive. I think it's $29 or something like that. And I take that GEDCOM file that I exported out of Roots Web or Ancestry and import it into GenSmart. What that does for me is actually let me create a research to-do list, which is most important when I go to the courthouses. What it gives me is that based on the information I already have in the system, it'll tell me that, okay, you have this information, but you may be missing this document. And this document may be located. And it'll give you a location, like it says Lafourche, Louisiana. I should be looking under the marriage records and it tells me the courthouse that I need to find. So very good aid. Of course, they mention counties as opposed to parishes, but we know in Louisiana we actually looking at parishes. Once I've actually got this sheet, what I would actually recommend you do is actually go to online and go to one of the search engines and type in the name of the courthouse that you want to visit and get their location, the address, the times that they're open, and a phone number. But also you might want to check and call the day before, call it day ahead, to make sure that they are open that day. Also find out a little more details about what you can bring in there. Some may not let you bring a phone, electronic devices. So those are the things that you need to know firsthand. Always bring some cash with you. You know, you got to make copies. So you want to make sure, and some may not take checks, some may, but you want to bring cash. Get a good night's sleep because you're going to be on your feet all day. If you're there, you know, you want to be there as soon as they open. So you want to get good night's sleep and wear very comfortable clothes because you may be standing for a long period of time. Bring a nice legal pad, writing pad, so you can actually take notes as well. And upon your arrival, you want to confirm the imaging policies that that courthouse may have. And the next step, and the most important step, I go right to the marriage records. That's where I actually start.
And I'm listening to you, and I love it because I'm not the technology to the degree he is by any means, but a lot of what you said, you know, I could relate with because I have my list. I have an ongoing list, and when I'm working on something else and I think of it, I run go put it on my courthouse list for whatever that courthouse is. Same type of thing. I will always check. I have been known to show up at a courthouse an hour away on November 1st and have it closed because it's All Saints Day, and I'm going, it's a Catholic holiday. Why is a parish courthouse closed?
That's right.
But I was in Assumption Parish, and they closed due to the holiday.
Yeah.
So I can't reiterate that enough because what we consider a normal working day may not be for them.
I'm Bishop Robert Munch, Bishop of the Diocese of Baton Rouge. Through Catholic Charities, the Bishop's annual appeal not only assists people with some of the most pressing needs within our community, but also helps prepare them for a better future.
If you're considering $1, give 10. Your money goes to direct services. It's not part of an administrative overhead. It really is touching people's lives across all 12 parishes within the diocese. To whom much is given, much will be expected. And so to those of us who can give, dig deep, because the money will go far into helping others.
Please take some time to recognize the many blessings that God has given you and to express your gratitude to God for those blessings.
For more information, please call 225-336-8790 or visit baabr.org.
Hello everyone, I'm Shannon Acord and this is Colette Keith, and we're talking about Veritas Vitae, a brand new show that's going to talk about the sacredness of God's gift of life from conception to natural death and every stage in between.
We'll be discussing human trafficking to abortion to hunger. So tune in every week to see these episodes and learn how we're all connected by these issues and learn about the power of God's truth.
Welcome back. We're talking about courthouse research, and we're looking at marriage records that can be found at a courthouse. The thing to keep in mind is that there are several different types of marriage records that we're going to be looking at and discussing, and it's very important for you to understand the differences in the different types. So we have marriage bonds, we have marriage licenses, and we have certificates of marriage. But that doesn't mean you're going to find all three on the same couple. Doesn't mean you're going to find 2 out of 3, 1 out of 3, or any. So that's what we're trying to discern, and then the information in them. So we're going to start explaining some of them in more detail, and I think Judy will talk to us on marriage bonds.
Well, marriage bonds, I think, confuse a lot of beginners. They don't understand exactly what they are, so I wanted to take a little time to explain those. Marriage bonds were very common in the 1800s and into the early 1900s. What the groom had to do was to sign a bond saying that there were no impediments to him marrying. In other words, he didn't have a wife somewhere else. He had to have security on that bond, who may have been a relative, may not, may have been the bride's father or one of her relatives who signed as the security. The bond could have been anywhere from $50 to $500, but that doesn't mean that he had to pay that amount to marry her. It's just he would have had to forfeit that amount if there was some reason that the marriage could not have gone through. But in fact, no money ever changed hands.
The information found on a marriage bond, that is very important. Again, it's not proof that the marriage ever took place. It doesn't have to be oftentimes it's the groom, but you never know who the other person signing for it is. So you can't make any assumptions on it. What you do have is you have a date. So you know that there's a relationship, and some point after that date, a marriage may have occurred. So it's a clue. That's basically what it is. Then another record that you're looking for would be perhaps a marriage license. And this is where they go to the judge, as we do even now, and request to get a license to marry. Again, you have like a 2-year span that you can use that license. You can pull it in one courthouse and get married in a different courthouse. But if the record is there for the license, again, you know, a relationship is there. You can look, see who signed, you know, the license for that in order to pull that along as a witness for the groom. And it does list who is getting married. It will rarely give who the parents of the parties are. It's them come and get the license by the judge. The third record is the actual marriage certificate, should you find that. And that's great because it's going to give you the date of a marriage. So that's a clear-cut, vital record that you have found. Now, if you have a Catholic marriage that took place, you're not going to find a certificate of marriage in the courthouse. You will find the license. The license oftentimes has been signed on the back by the minister who performed the ceremony, so you have a clue. You have the name of that minister, and sometimes you can research them if you don't know where the marriage took place or you don't have that vital record of the marriage. The other thing that the marriage license will give you is the span of dates. Say you have a license or a bond even. The bond is no proof that the marriage ever took place, but you've got a license, you're hoping it did, and you know that they had children, this same couple. So you found what you think is their oldest child, and you have the date on that license. So it gives you a range of dates, and if you never find a marriage, at least you know that that couple married within that time span of hopefully 9 months prior to the birth of that first child, and the date on the license. And that may be the best you ever get, and don't discount that. You just document the range, you document your license, you document the birth of the first child as helping you to determine that. Because it might be 10 years down the road, and you might be in a different courthouse, and lo and behold, you find a marriage record that you didn't know existed, and it gives you that validation. But in the meantime, it's still vital information for your tree, even though it's not exact. And so these are some of the things that we see. Is there anything you might want to add on that?
Well, I think it's important for them to know in the court, when they're in the courthouse, that the bonds may be filed all in one book, the license is in another book, the certificate's in another book. Sometimes they have a 3-part form where you have the bond, the license, and the certificate all in one. So when you're in the courthouse, you might want to check out other books. If you just find the bond books, you need to look also for the licenses and the certificates to get that proof that you're talking about, that they were eventually married on a certain date.
Right. And I know Assumption Parish, I have a good example here where I have the license and it's sitting right on top of the actual marriage record. Those two are in combined book. Yet on the shelf they have a bond book or they have the license book separate, but there are times where they happen to end up that way when they were entered into it. And we'll show this on the screen, but the handwriting is actually English, and it doesn't look it. It's so deplorable. And we do get that in the archives, and I'm sure y'all have seen it in courthouses and elsewhere. These are not typed records if you're digging in the 1800s or early 1900s. The handwriting is something you're going to have to deal with, and that could be a whole show. But anyway, let's see. Anything else quickly before we go to break? If not, we're going to take a short break right here, and we'll be back in just a minute to finish up.
Attention Roku users. You can now subscribe to Catholic Life Television's channel on your Roku device. Watch our live 24-hour broadcast as well as on-demand viewing of locally produced programming from the Diocese of Baton Rouge. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy Catholic Life Television, available on Roku.
of gracious love, you gathered us first at the waters of baptism, and you lead us through life with faithfulness. As once you formed us as a diocese of Baton Rouge, so now, Lord God, do for us again something new. Raise up from among our families and friends leaders to serve your people as priests, sisters, brothers, deacons, and lay ministers. To those to whom you call, give grace and courage to discern how they may best serve you. To us all, give good hearts so that we may encourage them along the way. May we live to see the fruitfulness of our longing, walking with you, O God, into a future filled with hope. We ask this through Jesus Christ and with your Holy Spirit, now and forever. Amen.
I'm Eddie Wright from St. Jean-Vianney Parish in Baton Rouge, and you're watching Catholic Life Television.
Welcome back. Now we're going to be talking about probate records in a courthouse. You might hear the term in Louisiana, a succession record, a probate record. They're basically the same thing here in Louisiana. Other parts of the United States, you will see it just as a probate record. What a probate is once someone dies, the courts open up their estate, and it's all the records that help to settle the estate. So found in a probate, you might find their creditors, what they owe, how much property they owned. Most of the time you only find it when they own property. And you find probates more in rural areas because there's more land ownership for farmers in rural areas. You do not find them on everybody. I think in the actual population, when I was researching last night, it's like 25% of the population in the 1800s actually had probates. Again, rural areas have more of them, but it's the settling of all of their properties. It may also, if they have minor children, then that's included because it includes family meetings to say who's going to be the guardians for these children, who's going to, be the one responsible for their well-being. So it goes through the court systems, and they have different stages of it. They might report back a year later, but they compile all these different components, and each one of these things provides a different set of genealogy records that, or I should say, genealogy information for us, the genealogists. Again, one created for that. So, anything? What else?
Well, I agree that probate records are filled with information and clues for our genealogy. Some of the files are rather voluminous, and then some of them you open them up and it's just one document that's in there. I wanted to touch on some of the individual items that you might find in a probate that are important to your genealogy research. A probate is opened when someone dies. A relative or a interested party will file a petition. Usually in this petition they will say when the person died, where the person died, if he or she was married, who their heirs were, did they have children, minor children. If there was a will, they'll say there's a will or there's no will. You may find a copy in the file. In Louisiana, if there were minor children, you may find records of something called a family meeting that you mentioned a while ago. The judge would gather around for a meeting all the nearest, 5 of the nearest relatives of the children so that they could deliberate on what was in the best interest of the children. If they didn't have relatives, they would fill in with friends and neighbors. But the important part of the family meeting is in the minutes, sometimes the recorder will note how everybody was related to the children. If they were the paternal uncle or the grandfather or some other cousin, a first cousin, sometimes they get real specific about how they're related. So those can be important clues in your genealogy. Sometimes they won't say that in the family meetings, and you just have to guess as to how everybody is related. But you know, if you have the same surnames, you can kind of say, hey, these people are related, and make note of all those people who were at that family meeting. Another interesting document you may find in a probate is an inventory. This is where they list all of the property. It's got some genealogical information.
Well, actually, let me say that in African American research, the inventory is an important document when you're actually trying to go back to your enslaved ancestors.
Right.
I have found 2 or 3 important inventories, successions that actually have my family members in it, and also sometimes it comes in family units, so you actually get the whole family
That's
there.
the best part.
Which is, yeah, those are the ones that you really look for. But I haven't had that luck yet. I've only had an individual, but this is an inventory is great for when you're actually going past that 1860 mark.
Yes, yes.
And in your case, it's important too, because sometimes in these, it's amazing the amount of detail and or lack of that you find in probates, because the more the property they own, the more complicated their estate is, the more detailed some of these records do get. And what ends up happening, say on these inventories too, is they're doing appraisals, and so they're an independent group of men who say they can come in and be fair and honest, assigns a value to everything in their I guess that they can assign a value to.
That's right.
Regardless of the fact the family's living on the land, whatever the case might be. So in the case of an African American family considered property, there's a value assigned. So when they get down to, say, an elderly one, sometimes they will give what their infirmities might be.
That's right.
And in a young case, a young mother with 2 young children, you see if there's a problem with one of them. There's a lot more detail I find in some of these, larger cases, which it's a wealth of information.
Yes, it is.
Same with the family meetings. I've had family meetings where when they're doing the family meeting, the names don't match, or they're a close friend, and they stipulate how far away they're coming from or where they lived. And so even though you might not have a surname that matches, you've got more information given in there as to why this one's being replaced over this one. They tend to explain a lot more, I find, in some of these bigger ones. But even so, it can be intimidating to get a large one because you've got all these loose papers.
But that's good.
Tied together,
Right.
and it takes you a long time to go through it, and you
does.
hope it's in English. But it's very important. Actually, even this is more advanced genealogy, but just to say, my goal right now on one of my brick walls is I'm going to courthouses and I'm pulling people they knew's successions to see if they're still alive, and they're buying a bed. I found one of my ancestors I thought had been dead 2 years. He bought a bed and paid for it in a succession. So they are a wealth of information for people.
You mentioned the sale. That's after the inventory is done.
Right.
Then there's a succession sale. Well, usually, not always, that the widow or the husband may take over the property. But if there's a sale, they will list who purchased each item,
That's right.
and how much they paid for it. And if, in case of slaves, you would see who purchased that family of slaves or the individual slaves. You would know who they went to, and you could trace it that way.
It definitely helps when you're actually trying to do your family tree, and you can actually almost go from, in that case, maybe one plantation to the other. And that way you're actually able to find that family unit where you may not have been able to have a paper trail for them. So that's a great source, and actually that has happened in my tree as well. So it was definitely a good document, a good find. Yes.
And then finally, there's the final judgment in the probate where the heirs are the proceeds of the estate are distributed amongst the heirs. So then you have a list of heirs there too. So that's also an important document to look for.
Yes.
And in that too, when they're distributing monies, pay attention to the percentages that are being distributed to heirs. If they don't always list if they have a will, and they have a daughter that died and she had 2 children at the time that they died, you will see a smaller percentage sometimes go. So if you've got 4 children, a quarter goes to 3 of them, and then all of a sudden you're seeing these 2 people are getting, was that an eighth? Y'all do the math for me here. But they're each getting half of that quarter. Then there's a difference in relationship there.
Well, it's important to understand the heirship laws in Louisiana to know there's very strict laws that say how much each heir is supposed to get. So you have to understand some legal terms also and when you're looking at these probate records.
But you can ask, because just in seeing that, you're knowing, it's a clue though that there's not an equal relationship among these heirs that they're, you know, distributing down to. Another thing that we didn't talk about that's a big confusion sometimes in there is there might be papers concerning tutor, truix. There's a term, it looks like tutrix. It looks like tutor. And the first thing that comes to mind is educating these children. And that's not what that means. It's a very common word used in probates. So not to confuse you, because we are talking at a very basic level, that is who they're looking for, and that's the purpose of the family meeting in many cases, is to assign guardianship to these minor children. And in the case of a woman, it's tutrix. I can't ever get it.
It's hard to say.
Natural tutrix would be their natural mother. Again, and they might have tutors, they could have co-tutors. What are those?
Under tutors.
Under tutors. So there may be, you know, different degrees or levels.
Right.
But it's to understand that it doesn't mean their education. It strictly means for the guardianship of those children. So is there anything?
Well, in Louisiana, we have a whole,
We have
new vocabulary, different vocabulary of legal terms that are different from other states. So we have to understand those when we're doing
Yes.
genealogy.
And you know, there's an excellent little paperback book. It is sold through the Terrebonne Genealogical Society on the legal translations in courthouses from French, which is very, very helpful. And some of your French predominant record courthouses like Assumption, Lafourche, have a copy of it there. And ask for the little green translation book is what I do. But down in along Bayou Lafourche, they're familiar with it.
We also want to mention about the fact that once you find these documents, you want to definitely reference where you got them from.
Oh my
and
goodness,
also
there we go
make
again.
copies.
Documentation.
And Leonard's the technical one. I've learned going to courthouses with him because he and I hit Napoleonville regularly. Photograph it. Photograph that book. When you find the document, if they let you.
If they let you.
You have to ask. Sometimes they'll let you just photograph the index or photograph the copy of the book. If not, please don't forget to do that. I can't take. He and I have forgotten. Did you get that book? No, I didn't get that book. So we need to close. We could keep on going for another day, but in the meantime, we're going to close on this subject, and we will see y'all again in the future for another episode of Roots of Faith Ancestry.